When I was in college, a pirate copy of Illustrator and Photoshop, worked my way through college with those.
Stefan, you've had an impressive career in UX, but what I want to do is I want to go back to the beginning.
I don't have any formal training in design. Like I still don't know where I'm heading. I was put in charge of things I should not have been in charge of.
I get so many questions from designers at the beginning of their career, figuring out how to improve their portfolio.
Your portfolio should have a story to it, right? It's not just like, here's stuff I've done. You need a story arc, right? It's not all the work you're doing. It is what is the canonical story that tells what I personally can offer you. And all of a sudden, you're like, I do everything. I even showed up to work every single day. That's my headline. Doesn't matter. Tell me a story. That's what matters.
If a hiring manager opened your portfolio right now, how long would they spend on it? Stefan Klosek has reviewed countless design portfolios, and in most cases, he knows within 60 seconds whether or not you're getting an interview. Today, he's sharing what works and what doesn't, and how to make your portfolio impossible to ignore. Today, we're diving into the biggest mistakes that designers make, why less is often more, and how to craft a compelling story that grabs attention. Plus, we'll talk about how AI is reshaping the entire hiring process and what designers need to focus on to stay ahead. I'm your host, Chris Abad, and this is Pixelated Path. If you're trying to land your next UX job, you won't want to miss this one. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode full of insights like this. Let's jump in. Stefan, you've had an impressive career in UX, but what I want to do is I want to go back to the beginning and just talk about where your interest in design first came from.
So like when I went to college, I actually got a communications degree because I was like, I'll probably interact with people. That's probably important. Not a bad decision if you know nothing about what you want to do. I do actually interact with a lot of people. And I got comfortable with talking and communicating and thinking about sort of what do I want to say, understanding like communication. That was a thing. I don't, you could maybe say, but I don't think this is a straight line. So I don't think you could say it was that. Both my parents are fine artists. So maybe, just growing up, drawing and stuff. But honestly, I think when I was in college, a pirate copy of Illustrator and Photoshop, worked my way through college with those. I'm just like, cool, this is fun. Like I just make posters and put them up in the dorms because it was fun. The internet was just sort of like taking off. Maybe the internet in a accessible way to customers and consumers was. So you could make websites and it was like, but just like kind of choose your own adventure in tech. And it was so exciting. It was like this optimistic, like the internet we have now sucks in comparison. Like it was just unbridled optimism. This is freeing information. Everything will be great. So a lot of it was just like thinking around on stuff like, how do I build a website? No real formal training. It probably wasn't until I eventually got hired. I first started in marketing and then got hired to a couple of design agencies. I was like, oh, there's like a name for what this is. There's a like way to do this as a practice. And that gave me some sort of actual, like a sense of formal structure to things like, oh, there's a process. You do this and then this and then this. This is what a deliverable is. This is how we can think about these. I had the great luck of working at a company no longer around called Cooper, which was in San Francisco. It's Alan Cooper had a company. He is credited with inventing personas many of us use. And that was like genuinely like, this is formal training. They wrote a book that is, was about interaction design. I was there when that book was being written. Like we were trained internally to come back and work with great people there. So that's probably where like I got anything that feels like formal training in design. That it's just like still stumbling through. Like I still don't know where I'm heading. I don't know. Is that sort of where you wanted to go with that?
Yeah. So the role that you had at Meyer Sound coming out of
Yeah.
school that was a marketing role. Your title there was art director.
Yeah.
How did you get that job coming out of school? Because I think you have like a lot of people today. Like let's say if I were talking to someone who's coming out of school today, whether it was a design degree or a communications degree, and then to land a art director even by title, at an agency. Like that's really hard today. Was there something you did differently? Was it just a different time?
I remember interviewing at places where they were like, "You're going to be the CEO of whatever." I don't think that was a real title then. You're going to be some highfalutin title that you have no business doing anything because just startups. So it was like, so I go to this company, Meyer Sound. It's a company in Berkeley, builds very professional loudspeakers. I'd never heard of them. Very brick and mortar because they're like building real products in the factory behind the room you're sitting in. Kind of unglamorous in many respects due to these other things. But I liked the people, the team felt kind of good. And I just had this sixth sense of like, this isn't going to last, this craziness. This company is building real products in the world. That's it. And that was a very good bet to me. I stayed there 5 years through the dot-com crash, where lots of people with these crazy titles doing things that they shouldn't have been hired to do or create lost jobs. And I was able to weather it because I was in a kind of boring, I mean, I don't know, loudspeakers are boring, but it's kind of like a niche, B2B. Their speakers are like $2,000, $10,000 for a speaker that you and I are not buying. But because they had real products and, concerts still happen in the world, like it was a really solid intuition of mine to like find a job that would be around. I'd say I really earned my way into that title, but I was like, make me this title. And they were like, sure, whatever. We don't care. You're still going to be, updating the website and doing, our full line catalog, and, jumping when the CEO wants a pretty graphic, go do it.
How much of you tinkering around in college and learning the basics of building a website, then and then coming in, like you said, 90s, like someone says, "Hey, do you know what a website is?" And you're like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Qualified." Like, was it, did that experience? Is that why you were able to get that role working on websites, or was it like the qualifications didn't necessarily matter? Like they knew that you were going to learn most of that on the job, anyways.
That's a great question. I wouldn't have hired. Like, I mean, other than like me being like an enthusiastic, like, hey, I've got good energy and like I seem to kind of know what I'm talking about. My portfolio at the time consisted of like, I don't know, posters I made for like clubs on campus at college, maybe some websites that I'd made for probably maybe some freelance stuff, but maybe, I mean, it's like, and I see people's work today when I'm hiring people or helping hire people where I'm like, oh, I can tell. Like, to me, there's like two obvious types of designers in the world, self-taught and people that went to school. And I can always tell a self-taught designer because their stuff's kind of all over the place. It doesn't have this like, cool, here's this process. This is named correctly. This like the body of work is like, cool. I did a website. Also, I did a logo and like, I also, made this like a magazine. Like, wow, you don't even begin to have like a space you focus on. Where like professional designers or people that came through school, I think there's often this like, cool, I learned to do this process. I learned to make these kinds of things. I'm a
Mhm.
visual designer. I'm an interaction designer. I'm a product designer. I'm a service designer. And there's like all their projects all line up to that. And it's really consistent. I was all over the map. So I do think it was the things I tinkered around with in college, having odd jobs of, cool, somebody needs a thing, I'll go build a thing, that gave me any leg up. But I don't think I'd be hired today, right? I mean, it's a different job market and people come out of school with a real degree. At that time, there was like one or two programs in the world that had degrees in this.
I never thought about that difference, like looking at someone's portfolio and sort of being able to tell if they were self-taught or not. Certainly around that time, everyone was self-taught. So I guess I've just sort of numb to it. But do you still run across that? Like when you're hiring designers, like do you find people who are self-taught?
Still do. Yeah, I think many of them often will come from like a freelancing background. They're probably just like, have not really ever been like, cool, I've been ingested into this organization. They've been doing freelance stuff on the side, maybe contracting. It's catch as catch can. So their portfolio is a little wild and unruly. They're trying to, I mean, if I had, and I sometimes mentor designers in this, I'm like, your portfolio should have a story to it, right? It's not just like, here's stuff I've done. You need a story arc, right? That's implied in the work you're showing it. Why am I seeing this thing? And then explain why this is important. And that always needs to tie back into a larger coherent story. A lot of freelancers might not even have, I mean, I've done this as well in my own career, but like where you begin to talk about your work as I've done all these things. I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent, right? There's lots of stuff you're like, oh, I fed my children this morning. You don't get points for that, right? It's like, no, I took them to Yellowstone this summer, and you're like, that you got points for that. There's a handful of highlights in parenting that you get points for, and all of the rest of like, and I took them for their annual checkup, and I took them to school or whatever. No points. That's just part of the job.
Table stakes.
The portfolio needs to also remove that. I remember I was many years later at Google, and I was trying to get promoted, and I had gone up and been rejected, I think twice, for principal level role. And I finally, in frustration, was just like, fine. The third time I was like, you know what? I'm going to just cut out most of the projects. I'm going to talk about 3 things that I did because y'all seem to be overwhelmed by the rest. Sailed through. The story was much easier because I wasn't trying to say, I do all of these things every day. I had really picked 3 canonical things that really illustrated I was hitting that next level of professional craft. But yeah, this is very clear. It was such a good learning. It's not all the work you're doing. It is what is the canonical story that tells what I personally can offer here.
Oh, that's so interesting. I think it's such a common that people fall into when they want to, whether it's their portfolio or going out for a promo case, demonstrate the impact that they have, but they do it through quantity. They want to include everything. Everything that they did was valuable.
Yep.
And to your point, like you start detracting from the story, and then it's just noise.
It is just noise. It's so funny because we're designers and you'd think this would be a thing. We're doing this for our users all the time, right? Oh, well, remove it. It's a distraction. No, can we not put that feature in here? Like they really need to focus on this particular part of the task. And you try to winnow it down and make it clear. And then we get to presenting ourselves, whether it's for a job within our portfolio or a promotion. And all of a sudden we're like, I do everything. I even showed up to work every single day. That's my headline. Doesn't matter. Tell me a story. That's what matters.
This is probably my own personal bias because I'm a big Deadpool fan. If you can't tell, there's Deadpool hiding back there. But there's this line that Colossus tells Deadpool about like being a superhero, and there's like 3 or 4 moments. Not every moment, just takes 3 or 4 moments. And I feel like that's what you're saying. Like you have the job, like you do these things all day, every day. But if you're trying to tell someone like what makes you unique, what makes you special, what are you really good at? Not everything. Maybe there's like 3 or 4 moments where you've done something really amazing.
I totally agree. And I actually would say, as you become more senior, you begin to have choices in the projects you take on, and especially if you're on the IC track, right? Like there's thousands of things that could be done in a given role. And the more senior you are, the more you need to actually begin to think, what is my story? What is the thing that I personally, and you could think about this in gamifying your portfolio. That would be one way. But I just think in terms of like, what am I uniquely good at? What is that thing that like that if somebody else took this job, they wouldn't do that, right? Like I personally can bring to this, and that is that superhero story, right? There's 4 things that like really show who the superhero is, and it's about their particular skill set or their particular mutant power or whatever, and also like some origin story that like created why they're different than everybody else. That begins to be the arc of your career. Like what company are you choosing? And then how do you tell that story, right? Like if I look across the things that I've worked on, it could be super checkered and weird. You're like, okay, so loudspeakers to agency work where you sort of focused on some healthcare stuff. And then you joined a healthcare startup, but then you do this big pivot over to Google. And then you're working at CRM there, but then you work on this consumer product that's more of a service back in the CRM, but it's a totally different company. What is your story, man? And like, that would not be the right way to tell my story because it's weird pivots. But if I pull back, squint my eyes a little bit, I'm like, high complexity, right? Really being able to synthesize and bring in a new perspective into a space that is being disrupted is a much tighter through line. And it's a much shorter phrase to say, right? It's not the kitchen sink. It's like, this is what unites all of these different experiences in a very, very tight, like if you were looking through a lens, you're like, they all line up in.
Oh, it's very cool. I get so many questions from designers who are at the beginning of their career figuring out how to improve their portfolio. I feel like one of the biggest missing things that's difficult for people to grasp that doesn't get taught in school is what you just said, like finding that through line so that you can tell a story. What other tips would you have for someone to like figure that out? Because it still can be very nebulous and conceptual. Like, what does that actually look like when someone puts together a portfolio that they send over to you because they're applying for a design job?
I mean, if we have a minute, I'd love to talk a little deep about portfolios. I think a lot about this because I've hired a lot of people, right? Or helped others hire, like even at HubSpot, like I'm like the portfolio guy. People are like, cool, let's just send it to him. He'll figure it out.
Mm.
I've done trainings for recruiters for the same thing where I'm like, cool, watch. And we can go through and I will reject a portfolio in less than a minute, right? Like you have a minute to capture my attention. This is not like I'm going to read the whole thing and then make a decision. I will read the whole thing if you can keep my attention from the jump. And I know last night I just went through probably 20 portfolios and I was like, don't. And like on some level, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is somebody's career. You know, I'm just like, just jumping through really, really quickly. But like, that is the reality is there's a lot of people that have applied for this position. I've got to go through and make some quick decisions. And I have something in my head about what I'm looking for, but I'm also really, really open-minded because like I didn't have a formal design education. Like I'm not going to look for like, cool, what school did you go to? Right. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that do. I'm not even gonna look for like, let me know your design process. I get bored when people go through the design process. I'm like, yes, I certainly hope you did some whiteboard sketches. I certainly hope you did some research, right? The thing that, and it's probably a little skewed, although I do help with looking. Yesterday was actually more junior designers. What I want to know is again, like a bit of that story. And some of that story is how do you think about design? So like one of my favorite things to see in a portfolio is a before and an after, right? I don't know your product space. I don't understand like all of the things, but I'm really good at assessing design. You might show me something where I'm like, I don't think that's great, but show me the before. And I might be like, oh, you did some really impressive work to move from A to B. B isn't where I would necessarily think about like making the hire, but then show me, like say, this is my design system I work from, right? So now I'm beginning to see you work within constraints too, right? I don't want to see you're a brilliant visual designer that can't follow the design system. So like, no, here's my design system that I went from. I didn't invent this. This was somebody else. That's their work, right? Give credit. Like, I want to know who you worked with. I don't want to be like, I did all of this. I want to know, no, I fought over this part, right? This product design is a hierarchy. Somebody was like, I chose the strategy. Great. Awesome. Your part when you were junior was I had to refine this feature. The feature had these problems. And then I needed to fix this. And these were like, we need to see these metrics happen. Awesome. Show me. I made it. It was this and then it was this. And then the metrics became this. Awesome. These were my constraints. I couldn't set the strategy because like I might disagree with that product strategy. And if you don't say, listen, I didn't understand this product strategy. I didn't like it, but they told me this is what I needed to do. And my position was mid-level designer. I didn't say over that. Then awesome. I rather respect that. I want to hire a mid-level designer that can follow instructions, you know, and meet the sort of criteria for the product, not somebody who's going to constantly challenge the strategy. That's like a no-op.
So
I think being honest in the work you're doing and really like helping me understand very quickly rather than like telling me a long story about like you did a bunch of whiteboarding. Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, no, it's okay. One of the things that you said that I hear a lot are, designers have this final output that I worked on something, I show it to you, I know it could be better, and I'm really self-conscious about it. And the reason why it's not better is because constraints, business constraints, time constraints, like whatever constraints I had, or
Yes.
conversations I lost and we had to go this direction, but I thought that direction was horrible. What do you think about that? Like, what's that balance?
One of the things that I had to deal with and constrain in a non-defensive way. So I read somebody's portfolio last night that was like, I still don't understand why we didn't do this. Okay, wrong way to lens that on the portfolio, right? Instead, I'd rather be like, gosh, I understood why we needed to do this thing, right? If I had not had this constraint, here's what I would have done. Amazing, right? Like, I love a design portfolio that says, here's what we shipped. Here's what I would have liked to have done, right? I did this knock on the side of just like, here's where I would have taken it. Awesome. I can see your thinking. I can also see that you can work within a constraint. You're going to be able to ship something because I'm not hiring you to design, to like draw rectangles on Figma. I'm hiring you to like ship product with engineers and PMs. Like you would need to be able to do that work. But I'd love to see unbridled where your mind goes, but like do it because you can also speak to it. So I think that like the nervousness over the like, I know this isn't good is a thing to be bear hugged, like own it, right? In the same way in like a relationship with somebody who you're, I don't know, just starting a date or whatever. If you're like, hey, you know what? I know that I get a little a little needy after a few months and like, I'm sorry, I'm working. That's so much more reassuring than like, I am so perfect. I'm going to be your best partner ever. And you're like, no, I know that you have things that are a problem and you're just trying to like help sell me something. I don't want to be sold your design. I want to come along for the ride. We are going to be in the weeds together right? We are going to be discussing that. When I was at Google, I had the privilege of me and two other guys we wrote the job letter for design at Google for like 7 years. And my favorite thing we ever did in that job ladder is we introduced a set of criteria that went all the way up, which is it was about like, I know this isn't good and I can explain it. And at my level, I challenged it in the right way. So like when you're very junior, it's like, I just raised this up. Right. And like, if you spoke to it and you brought it into the room, like I'm uncomfortable. I don't think this is meeting the user need or whatever. That was okay. You spoke to it. It got surfaced and we know you don't have the power to make this change. By the time you're a director, you needed to have put down all of your chips to make this and shift the product strategy because this is the wrong thing and that shouldn't go out on your watch. I loved that just embracing of like, yes, we are humans. We have failings. We are building products that have constraints, that have timelines, that have tech debt. The more you can speak to that, the more I can trust that you're actually really, really a good designer because you understand the world. If you're trying to sell me like I design perfect things, I can't hire you. We don't have any perfect things to build.
I think I have ever seen someone make a direct connection between how you look at portfolios and what you look for in portfolios and job ladders inside of a company. But I mean, there's a lot of overlap. When you do these like portfolio trainings or you review portfolios yourself, like, does that become a factor at all? Have you ever used either your knowledge of job ladders or you go find a job ladder? Like, is that a thing?
We did efforts within Google to make sure that the questions that people were looking at when they were looking at portfolios or doing that interview process did line up to the job ladder. So there was a very explicit thing. I'd say that seems uncommon to do it at almost a procedural level where like, we were like, cool, you're asking this question. Does that help us assess this? Like if we hired you into this, you'd be able to do the same type of thing. I think there's a loose sensibility that if you're senior and you've done this a long time, you're like, well, I remember at that level, I've worked with a lot of people at that level. I have an understanding because I'm working with somebody who's L5 of like what that would kind of look like. I see their output every day. So I have a pretty good benchmark for what that looks like. Mm-hmm. But at Google, it was actually an exercise we had actually done. I think it's probably like on our roadmap at HubSpot, it's a huge amount of effort, and even just the maintaining of like, cool, well, we changed this question here and we changed the ladder criteria here. Do they align? Google was larger work. We could spend more time on it.
You mentioned earlier you've also done training with recruiters on how to look at portfolios. What are some of the things that you teach recruiters? Like if I'm a job applicant, I want to get in the head of a recruiter, especially if that recruiter is, the first step between me and getting into an interview process. So what do you teach recruiters to look for?
It's a great question. Some of it is sort of job specific. So like I'm working with a recruiter right now, and I went through a bunch of these portfolios, and she hadn't asked for necessarily training, but I left comments of like, this is really sort of, I'd say like 5 of the applicants that she had included felt to me like they were design system candidates only, and almost skewing into like visual design and brand. I'm like, no, I need a full stop product interaction designer. I need somebody who's going to get in the weeds on the AI side of things. So I tried to explain like this portfolio, it doesn't show this person working through an interaction design problem, right? Like pulling out some detail and being like, we could go this way or we could go that way. So I was trying to teach her, how do you read that in a portfolio? And if it's just everything as a design system and they're building components, like I have some of that work I need, but that isn't the full job. But there's been other times where I'm hiring just for a design system. And I might say like, gosh, it looks like a design that you'd see a bunch of layouts that look like this. There's all the components across it. If they're solving more product problems, it's a plus, but it's not really what I'm looking for, versus like hiring somebody for brand or visual design, where I might be like, I want to understand their illustration style. So like if I'm not seeing sketches of things and different interpretations and different visual styles that are applied, or I'm seeing something that it looks like they only have a single style, like I don't really want to hire. It needs to look diverse. I want somebody who can flex to the different needs that we'll have in this particular role. So often it's a little attached to the role. I think if I were to pull back, there's a more generic version of looking at portfolio, which is like big hairs to split. If you're just showing me mocks and you're not explaining your thinking, it's out. Like I'm not going to spend the time to try to teach myself your design thinking through the mocks that you did, especially if there's not a before and after. If there's a before and after, I can kind of tie a story together if I need to. But if you're just showing me finished artifact, like a dribble, right? And it's just like, here's some finished mocks. Don't they speak for themselves? No, especially as a product designer, I need to know maybe on the visual design side, I could hire somebody just off of like, this is brilliant. But also I'd want to know like, how many sketches did it take you to get there, right? What other explorations did you do? And so that could be, you could just show me, and I don't know, I'd probably be overwhelmed by the thing, but how many other people were you working with, right? Did you have guidance? Was there input? What are their stakeholders? Like some of the framing around it. So words really help me understand the work that I'm seeing. So just pretty pictures, almost always I can't say yes because it's just not enough. I looked at somebody's portfolio yesterday who wasn't focused a lot on the work. They just spoke to sort of the different kinds of problems they looked at. I did reach out and I was like, can I see some of the mocks? But like the kinds of things you're describing are really, really great. So I think words, and there's a sweet spot here, right? If it's just pages and pages of words, like no. So it is a communications, I'd say like bullet points rather than paragraphs. What is the quickest way for me to understand this? I did see somebody, this was very compelling. It was more senior, hiring for a principal role last week, but he had a video of him talking about design on some conference or something like that. And I saw him speaking about design. I was like, yes, this is the kind of person I want to hire. Like the gravitas, the understanding, the nuances he was pulling about, the energy. So I do think maybe a talk that somebody's giving on design would be very helpful. I've reached out to people based on Medium posts. So I do think there's like adjacency to a straight portfolio that And so maybe somebody really junior or early on in their career, you might not have that much. It might be mostly from school. But what other things are you writing about design? Are you thinking about design? Do you have a podcast? Like, are there other ways for me to get how you think about the world and understand how you express it? That could easily, for me, tip me into yeah, at least somebody worth talking to. I don't think if you just had a video, here's me pontificating about what I think design is, that I'd give you a call. But I could work from a kind of thin set of actual, product examples. I had the rest of it are like, well, this person's like, they're thinking about the right things. They're thinking about things in an interesting way. They have an opinionated perspective. Spec products, I'm mixed on it. In some ways, I see a lot of spec products where somebody's just like, cool, if I were hired by Airbnb, this is how I'd redesign their thing. And you're like, I'm not hiring you for the ideal. So like, unless you're picking some really, really good constraints in it, and that might be interesting. So I could see somebody picking solid constraints and then doing a spec product would be maybe something I'd engage in. Spec products usually no.
Yeah, I love that suggestion though, because I've certainly run into people who maybe they're fresh out of school and they're looking for other ways to demonstrate their work, but they haven't gotten their first job yet. And so they'll ask like, what if I just come up with a project that shows this off? And usually what we end up talking about is the difference between that and the real world is you don't have all the constraints. And that's like 80% of your job. So I love the idea of like creating those constraints and working those into your case study and into your project.
Yeah, like I'm senior enough that I could not be spending time on a spec project. I have real projects all over the place. But as a parent, I really, 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 really wish that Apple had a better parent like system for engaging with controlling your kid's device and access to things. It always annoys me when I'm trying to make some adjustment. Oh, my son just turned 14 and I'm like, oh gosh, all these different things changed. And I don't know where. I have this like side thing. I'm like, gosh, I could easily reverse engineer the constraints that they, out of looking at that problem, put those down as like, cool, these are the constraints. And then, I mean, I want to do it just because I really want Apple to make it different. I have thought of applying to Apple just on that of like, please let me do this because I really want this for other parents, but also myself, because I run into this. So that'd be like a good spec product, but like work your way out of like, what must Apple, they must, there's some constraints here that are holding them back from doing it this exact way. Wrestle with that constraint, identify that constraint. In some ways, think like a PM, right? A PM is going to have to come up with requirements. I think it actually makes a much better designer if you are good at also figuring out requirements. So go think about what is challenging this? Why technically might this be a problem for them to make this change? Write that down. Say, these were the constraints that I assumed were there. Now I can still show a better design. That's kind of cool.
Stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but it was interesting making the connection from PM and what a PM does and creating the requirements. And we were talking a lot about constraints. I think one trap that sometimes PMs fall into is you're responsible for creating the requirements. You assume those are all the definition of what it should do and how it should work. And actually, I think one of the most valuable things a PM can do is identifying and uncovering all the constraints so that the designer knows what they need to work around so they can come up with a solution. That's super interesting.
But what a great designer if you can do that too, right? I mean, I've been accused of being, people like, are you a PM or are you a designer? I'm good at writing. I can totally sit down and do the spec. I'm willing to get pretty technical to go down and look at like, what is the API? How does that work? What are the variables we're actually passing through here? And then I'll go back out and I do a design. And it's so grounded. And people are like, I don't know if you spent a lot of time playing with any of the AI tools, but let's just pick like the ChatGPT.
It's like all I do.
Finding, same. Exactly. I'm working at it. But like, I'm finding, and I think that this is the magic skill of the future for designers is like AI is going to do a lot of the basic design, right? Like and I'm not a doomsdayer on that. It's just like, great. I don't want to do the auto layout. Like that's a silly thing. Please do the thing. Like I had AI go through something the other day And I was like, cool, identify and summarize these points. And it did it in a general way. And I was like, cool, that got me like the 80% there. The real value I'm adding is the 20% on top where I'm like, not nuanced enough. This is very, very nuanced here. And when I get to the nuance of like, it's this phrasing actually counts, it doesn't do that well. That's the same skill set I want in a designer, which is like, cool. Generally, I applied the same pattern, right? We have a pattern library. Like you're not really doing that many magical things. Figure it out. Here's the one new component we should build because that unlocks this entire experience, right? Show me mostly it's all the standard components because I know that you're good then for our design system. And then you're like, okay, we could do this in a standard way, but if we build this new component, this turns into magic. That 20% is what I'm hiring, not the 80%.
If it's really interesting because there are a lot of people out there right now who like you said earlier, there is formal training. You can go get a degree. Like you can formally learn how to do UX design, interaction design, product design. Seeing what's happening with AI right now and trying to anticipate which of these skills am I still going to need, which ones become irrelevant. So, and you seem to have like a clear picture of at least part of how this will work for a designer. What are the things that traditionally you would learn in like a design education that maybe you feel like aren't going to be valuable, or maybe people should just stop trying to learn because it won't be relevant 5 years from now?
I think it would be auto layouts in Figma. It's a good example of like, do I really need to learn the padding and the whatever, like, or be super disciplined in how I'm building these things? I'm going to need to know how this tool works so that I can build one of these things. But like me being super precise, I've had designers who work for me who are just, they're impeccable in their design craft. Like it's always aligned. I'm like, okay, like, I don't know that that's a forward looking skill, even though I appreciate it. You're very neat because the tools are going to do a lot of that. And I think you can begin to draw lines for a bunch of this where like, I actually often fight with designers who are inventing new patterns when we have a standard pattern library. Don't do it. I want the discipline of you to come in and be like, our Lego set has these shapes in it. I used these shapes. Any designer could come in and just invent a new component. That's fun. Your job is to do all this with existing Legos, and that's hard because back to your point on the constraints. I think a lot of those components and are also going to be like the design, somebody on the design system builds you that component. You're actually going to need to be able to identify what is the unique job that I need for this component to do and make the request to them. Can you extend this component to do something new? And here's the reason why. And I can point at, here's the 20 other use cases this would unlock across the rest of our product portfolio. I think a lot of applying an overall brand to things is probably going to be done by AI. And it's going to be these like, but here's where I broke the rule, right? Like AI is never going to know how to break the rule in a good way. So that's like, usually we do this and here's the one spot where I broke it. It's still in the spirit of it, but if you did the mathematics or the probabilities, it would not work out. I'm actually breaking the rule. I wonder if this is a harder thing to sort of conceive, but I have a thought that the design tools that we're using are fundamentally outmoded already. They're for words form of design that makes no sense going forward. And I'll unpack that a bit. Designers coming up, even if you weren't in school, you just figured out, computers are deterministic, right? I will always be able to show, I can sweat the exact phrase in this and this exact label for this button because I know what it is. And the engineer we're moving and already pretty deeply into a space where everything's going to be, or many things, it's going to be this blend of deterministic and non-deterministic, where, I don't know, will that be a sentence or a paragraph? Hard to know. Depends on what the AI thinks the right answer is to this thing. Will it come back formatted in a particular way? Hard to know. We hope so. Maybe we can try and aim it that way with some few shot examples where please bring it back as a bullet list, but we don't necessarily know that it's going to be. And I think that or design tools, if I look at Figma as a for instance, like it's for a deterministic world. Like I know what will be on the screen and I can design that and I'm showing that to my engineer and they're like, cool, this is 20 pixels, right? We need tools that are all about the dynamism in a non-deterministic world. Like it could be this, but it could also be these 20 other things. It's like about the variance. It's like we need to design in the error bars rather than the average, right? We've been designing, how do you, and I don't think I don't think AI is going to be just chat. Like that's a wildly miscalibrated view of it. We're going to have whole screens where the components themselves were on the fly generated by AI to build this screen out. How does a designer begin to think and design for that world where like you don't know what's going to be in the upper left-hand corner or the bottom right-hand corner? It's going to be a dashboard and there's stuff on it, right? And how do you begin to think at that more sort of abstract, dynamic way of like, but it's sort of design system-y, but it also needs to be hyper opinionated about the work. So it's where design systems, I think you usually just like, I ignore the work, ignore the actual task that the user's trying to do. And I'm instead focused on like, I need a drop down widget, or I need a sort of a wizard or whatever the thing is, abstracted away from any work that's being done. We're going to need to have this polarity that we're working from, which is totally dynamic. Like the range of the work could be this. And I'm really opinionated about what matters in it. And like, how do I sit down and work with the engineers on the exact prompt that we're sending to the LLM to get the result in a way that meets the real user need? Because most of it is going to be like, I don't know, the other night jamming with my brother, he's also a designer. We're talking about, and I was like, gosh, I wrote this prompt. And he's like, well, what if you did this? And like, we're sitting there, like really trying to riff on how do we get this prompt to get a better result on the end? Designers need to be sweating that. Like that is, and it's not about being a prompt engineer. It's about delivering quality to the user that meets like it. If you're using anything in the world and it's delivering you kind of obvious shitty quality, you quickly abandon it because you don't trust it. We always talk about as designers, like we're here for, build user trust. Like, how do we do that in a non-deterministic world where like sometimes it's this answer and sometimes it's that? You send the same query and you get a different result each time. How do we build trust there?
What are those skills then that a designer would need? Because like, you talked about fully dynamic screens where a lot of the content is generated. And so normally the skills that a designer would need to control the quality of that end output is I need to be able to draw the pixels that show up to the end user. But if you're no longer drawing the pixels, what are the new levers? And then what skills do I need to learn as a designer so that I can manipulate those levers? You mentioned prompt engineering, and I think that is a really common one. I mean, you said it's not about being a prompt engineer. I kind of think it is. I think designers who work with systems that require prompts, whether it's generation, text generation, anything, like being in that, I think you're developing really important skills that are going to help in this future world.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, I tell every designer I work with, I say, I know you're working in HubSpot as a system, right? And that's great. I want you to try every single thing that you think this feature is supposed to do in ChatGPT first. Like if it's, I don't know, you're trying to generate a blog post, which is a thing that HubSpot does, where you can write a blog post, try and do that. You're trying to do it, advertising campaigns. That's the thing you can do in HubSpot. Go try and do that in ChatGPT. If you are not getting that quality or higher from your own engineers, they're not working hard, right? Like you need to be opinionated and say, I need something that is this fast, this high quality, because somebody could take the same thing and go do that themselves and not need HubSpot. So like your customer has this access to this tool. And I think that's also a really interesting thing. We all have access to the same tool. So we need to be doing something on top of whatever ChatGPT's best example is. We need to be able to do better than that. GPT sets a silly high bar for things. It's not perfect, but like it's a pretty good high bar on like, if you, to your point, have a reasonably good prompt, you can get exceptionally good things out of it. So I do agree. It's like really engaging with AI as like, it is a material in the same way. if you were, I don't know, gosh, dating myself, but there was phones before touchscreens. And, we had cell phones with buttons on them. And it'd be like saying as a designer then, like, well, all I need to, I'm going to still use my button oriented phone because this touch screen, I don't know, how hard is it to design for? It's a totally different medium. You needed to get on a phone and be in a touch environment to be able to design for it. So as we're stepping into the AI world, you need to be hungry. Like, I have so many AI projects on the side that just force me to confront, where does this do well? Where is this hard? What are the things I find myself wanting in this? Because my customers or my users are going to want that same thing. And I need to begin to tie together, what does it take to get there? Because the obvious, just like, cool, I chat with it, it gives me a thing, that's solved. Like, I don't need to, I could be fired if that's the only thing, because OpenAI solved that already.
Other than using current AI tools to like understand the technology and understand what's possible, where do you find yourself using generative AI in your design process today? Like what parts of your design process has it either sped up or made easier or even replaced?
I use it all the time for mock data. And like, actually, like, and I've pulled back all the way to like, I have mock companies that I have made out of it and mock personas, all of it that has this like coherence to it, so that when I'm designing a thing, I can use a real reference. Like, I long ago gave up on lorem ipsum. You are not a designer that is putting rectangles on a screen. You're a designer that is communicating ideas, and you're communicating that and building a tool that needs to have levers that have meaning to it. And so like, you have to be opinionated and understand the work product. That means not just a lorem ipsum label. That means that the details of this, and I think that's all the way down into like, you deliver a mock and it has a particular state in it. That state needs to be reflected in all of the content on it, is what makes it alive. That is what communicates to somebody, you understand my work. You understand what I'm trying to do, or my need is, I see the details of what I need in that. So I think that storytelling side of I use it all the time for that, and have like full pieces there. I do a lot of research with it as well to try to sort of explore the ideas of the things we're designing.
Can
Right.
you say more
So
about that?
help me understand. Yeah. Help me understand this particular space and what somebody would be doing in it and why this would matter to them. Right. What's hard in this space? I think one of the very future skills that most humans are going to really, really need is critical thinking. Like, I think in an AI world where most things are AI, the major thing that we'll be able to do is critically think. And that is to be able to question the apparent answer that comes, and to be able to develop a perspective around it. So it's like, I don't know, you talk to the customer and they say, oh, this is the most important feature, or this is the most important aspect of my workflow. Is it? Like, this one customer said that, and it's very compelling when they do that. But can I pull back out and begin to get a lens on like, but would all customers say this? Is this the average? Is this the edge? Is this customer common? What's the total addressable market for building this feature or building it this way? So I begin to really try to explore the space that I'm designing in by learning about it in using AI. I have really wanted to do diagram with AI, where like I sort of a conceptual diagram of understanding a whole space or like a whole workflow. I have not found an AI tool that does it at the level of quality that I could do it on my own, but I am eager to be able to, cool, map this whole space for me, map the
Mhm.
sequence that somebody would work through this. I find myself increasingly using FigJam rather than Figma, because I'm actually schematics of how things connect together and showing what is that A goes to B goes to C. In some ways gets at the blurriness better than the mock. I still have lots of people ask for mocks, and I'll do a mock, but I'm like, the problem we're wrestling with is the sort of fuzziness here, and this mock will give you false confidence that we've got this solved. let's do a mock when we agree that this overall sequencing of things generally is true. We're at the right fidelity to understand this. I really want an AI diagramming tool. I would use that every day, all day, begin to understand relationships, because I think that ends up being, whether it's like relationships of data. And so I'm doing a lot of that without the diagramming, but like, what are parallel, what are other kinds of work that could need to be done in the same workflow that I'm not thinking about?
Hmm.
And like, okay, well, it just generated a whole list of it. But then I have to be skeptical and be like, is that really true? And they're like, well, okay, no, I made up half of it. So like you can't just take what it says as part of it. I was trying to think through AI and settings and agents the other day. I was trying to think of like, when a user is going through this, at what point will they be configuring what kind of aspect? We haven't built it yet, so I don't know. So I'm needing to sort of posit it. And so I was like, if the agent can do this thing, when do you need to configure this? And can you draw a sequence for it? So it did an outline, like a bulleted list, which was cool. But I was like, wait a second. So you're setting up the security down here while at the same time you have it set up here. I challenged it and it was like, oh yeah, you're right. These should be together. So like, do you think it requires that critical thinking to engage with it rather than just wholesale? You copy out what it is. I mean, quick aside, I think that is the value of it. It helps you think through something for yourself, but then you need to, if you're going to communicate to somebody else, please add something. Please add a layer of meaning, a layer of critical thought, because that's that 20% where you took it beyond the basics and made it valuable.
I think this is going to be a really tricky one because I find this happening in my own work where AI can generate possibilities and ideas and sets of things very quickly, but 80% of it is mediocre or garbage. 20% of it is good. And my value is I actually know the difference between the two. And
Yes.
so, like, that's great. That's such a faster, more efficient workflow. But the only reason why I know it's good is because I spent doing it without the
Yes.
tool. And
Um,
so if the skill is the editing and the curation and the like taste making, like the having good taste and good sense, like as these tools get better, like do people just lose that? And then what happens?
are not designers. And it has a chapter in it called Judgment. And it's a fabulous book. I loved it. And I like to read kind of hard things to grok. And it's probably my favorite book on design, in spite of it maybe not being written by designers, like just academics. But that they had a whole chapter on judgment. I'm like, I want a whole book. I want a whole library on developing design judgment, because I think that is the special sauce we're bringing, right? That is in a taste making, and if it's in an aesthetic sense, but it's also the like, is this balancing all the different needs? Like, well, the engineering team wants to do it this way. The PM has this timeline around it. The user really, their mental model is this, but it doesn't fit our engineering schema and our database schema. Can I argue for the abstraction layer where it changes, or that's too costly or doesn't meet our timeline? Can I make a trade-off that sort of meets halfway between, where like we explain it to the user, even though it doesn't match what they're doing? If I could teach one thing in like design school for the future, it is judgment. And that is maybe, so there's a favorite story I also tell, which I have heard is not apocryphal, but I do think about it a lot when I think about design, which is there's a pottery teacher, and he has a bunch of students in his class, and he I don't know why he does this, but he's like, pass the class. You're going to be graded on the quality of your stoneware. And the other half of the class, you're going to be graded on the quantity of your stoneware for the semester. The question is, which half the class came out with higher quality stoneware? And the answer is the ones who were graded on quantity, because they were unafraid to make the mistakes, and because they just did this again and again and again and again. They got better at it, where the people who were focused on quality were so terrified of getting things wrong, they didn't experiment and didn't learn. So I wonder if there's a version of this where like the making of judgments and testing them and exploring them is the way. I mean, back to your point of like you and I had tools coming up that didn't do it for us. So designers going forward might have tools that are doing a bunch of those things, are going to actually have to get good at challenging the tool and trying to do things that the tool is like, I don't think that's the right thing, so that you can form your inner sense of judgment about, is this good? Is this right? Is this the best solution? Maybe it will also be just doing things on the side. So you have a tool that is Figma 5 or whatever, and it's just all AI, and you already just sort of say, I need a screen that has a bunch of dashboards on it that they do this, and it just draws the whole thing for you. You on the side should pull out a sheet of paper and a pencil and be like, do I think this is the right way to go? Like, so that I can say the 20% that you did here is wrong. It is developing your independent.
Hmm. Man, I love that idea. I think this question of what is the role of a designer as AI potentially starts to replace some of the things that we do today. And I think I've this idea of judgment in one way or another constantly comes up. And I've seen it in practice. And then I think it's such an interesting thread to follow to say, well, if it's so important, how do we teach judgment? Like the future proof skill for designers. And a lot of skills, like you learn them and then you get better at them through repetition and practice. And so like a lot of what you talked about is the repetition and practice, but how do you down the skill of judgment and teach it as a skill? I don't know if you have
I,
thoughts on that.
I don't know, because when I read this chapter, I was like, this is so good. This is the best chapter in this book. I've read a lot of design books. Nobody's ever talked about judgment. I've tried to find books on judgment, and maybe there are, but I have really tried to find it because I do think it is ultimately, at a certain point, that's what you are hiring in a designer is there's some level of skill, right? Like I can manipulate it, but like if it can draw the rectangle and it can apply the brand and it's using it from the design system, it's a component you already had. Like I didn't hire you for that. What I hired you for is like, you can see the point A and point B and point C, they triangulate here. And judgment does not mean, and I think I had this conversation with some designers I work with the other day who are more junior, and they were like, well, how do you assess the design? It's subjective. And I was like, it is not subjective. A good design for a product, there is objective measures. You can say, I would weight them differently, right? Like I think you're weighing too much the technical maintenance on this. And so you made it easy for the engineers to maintain this. And I understand that, where you weighed too much on like the latency. So, you made it super fast, but it's imprecise, or there's other trade-offs you made. But it's objective. And that's why judgment is not, I'm not talking about a subjective skill. You need to be able, and that's, I think, where it ties into the critical thinking as well, is you are able to, and maybe this ties all the way back to the conversation we were having earlier about like in your portfolio, I'm not interested in a perfect design. I'm interested in you explaining the decisions that you had to make within the constraints that you were facing, right? Really asking for is, how did you judge this? Did you know that this was a bad design? Is one. And if you did know, what things did you think about and what things did you try to mitigate to make it a better design than where it would have ended up if you hadn't been there? Do you know those things? And did you have those conversations and have those thoughts? And if you did, then awesome. Like, I want to hire you because that's the skill I need on my team.
Yeah, man, so much to think about. This is a super fun topic. I wanna bring this full circle, because even though we didn't get into a lot of like some of the roles in your career, I think the topics that we are on are so important and so many people are curious about. The main ones being like a lot of people trying to figure out how to present the portfolio, and then the other one, like, what do we do with AI? To sort of cap things off, if we just summarize some of our
Yeah.
conversation around portfolios, like for someone who's working on their portfolio right now, fresh out of school, trying to get land their first job in the market the way it is right now, like what tips do you have for someone when thinking about their portfolio and how to make it better?
Super practical tips. be very clear in your own mind. Like I've seen people like hand code a portfolio, right? Like a website, right? And like, I don't, if you are going to genuinely blow my mind with you have conceived of something better than a WordPress template, and there's like this, it's uniquely capable of presenting your work in a special way, amazing. Do it. Like it might blow my mind. If not, I do think there's a middle ground between you did choose the right web service or WordPress template to express the work. Like, did you think about, like, gosh, I mean, there's like kind of basic mistakes where you didn't choose a service or a theme that had a light box. So I'm squinting at little tiny images. Like, I can't evaluate your work there. Like, about so that is like just a very basic thing. I will reject somebody. It could look brilliant, but you didn't think about the basic UX of interacting with your portfolio. Like that's a huge red flag that you're not thinking about this work in the most fundamental way, which is right now I'm your user trying to evaluate you. I do think really trying to come up with some sense of narrative, even if it's just plain, like I'm going to just explain the problem. Even if it's a school problem, right? Like this is the problem we were given in class and I did this. Here's what my thinking was. Here's the constraints we had. Here's explorations I had. Like show me the diversity of the explorations you had. And then here's my final solution, right? Or here's the existing prior art in the world. And here's how it was transformed. Some way to like your storytelling to me. And imagine I don't know anything about you and I don't know anything about this class that you spent 6 months in. I don't know anything about this industry that you've been working in to help me get the basics of what I need to evaluate the work I'm seeing is not going to stand on its own. My work doesn't stand on its own with me 2 months after I release it. I'm like, that sucks. I know that this is not good. It's really, really helpful. A balance of words and images on a portfolio. Tell me what your role was. Tell me the other people you worked with. Like if there was a design director, awesome. Like what did they do versus what did you do? You might even highlight that around a given design problem, right? Like they gave me high level feedback of X. I implemented it this way. And that's why this was a good solution or whatever it is. Like that's a useful thing. Like I'm trying to get to know who you are. A portfolio is a communications device. I don't know who you are. I think if you are light on portfolio pieces, showing places where you're doing design thinking or things in the community is another great way to do that. Also thinking about like, and I think as you're thinking through a portfolio, what is my unique story? Like what makes me special and it's probably not the industry I'm working in. It's probably not the kinds of companies I've worked at. It's probably not the tools I'm using. There's something that like, when I'm helping people work on decks, like I'm like, cool, your deck should be able to work, but just the headline on each slide is the only thing I read, right? That needs to tell me the entire story of this slide, no matter how much detail is on it in an editorial way. And then I move to the next one. If there is a header on your website, there should be I could just read the headers and I understand the story. The next level down is the next level of detail. Be really, really crisp with if there's a header, never label it. Like I can see that this is the example, right? Editorialize, this example that I'm showing catalyzed our team to be able to move past this solution. Awesome. Now I understand why I care about looking at this mock. So always tell me a story. And if we think about what is the best story in the world, it is not, I had a good day, right? The best story in the world is always, I woke up, I thought I was going to have a good day, and then I had a challenge and I overcame it and I didn't think I could. There's always a challenge, and your portfolio at every level should be helping me understand what challenge you were overcoming.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that advice. Thank you so much for indulging my deep dive into portfolio reviews and portfolio techniques.
It's such an important area. Like I don't know if there's a class that they teach, but if there is a class that is taught, I would hope it's taught by people who are hiring people, because it's not just a generic artifact that you just like produce. Here's my design process.
Mm-hmm. If someone wants to connect with you online or follow some of your work, where can they find you?
I think it's probably at stefanklochik.com. I don't know. I have all of this good advice. I'm like, oh, you should be writing about stuff. I have like a Medium page I started and I was like, I just don't have time for it. So I'm underinvested in being super like verbose online, but I'm always happy to like chat with people if they reach out like you did.
Super cool. Thanks again, Stefan, for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation. This was awesome.
Awesome. I really enjoyed it too.
And that wraps our conversation with Stefan Klosik. So many great takeaways, especially the importance of storytelling in your portfolio, focusing on just a few strong projects, and making sure that your work is clear and easy to understand, all in under a minute. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss one more conversation like this. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Abad, and I'll see you next time on Pixelated Path.